we're happy this week to bring you our new webinar on Wi-Fi fundamentals, right? A lot of people like to dive in deep, add complex detail, look at very complex designs, troubleshooting scenarios, but it's really the fundamentals that allows you to resolve those issues and put together those solid Wi-Fi designs that deliver on your customers' requirements. And we've brought in a special expert to help guide us in this conversation.
Yeah, we're super lucky today to have not only a great guy, but also someone that knows so much about wireless in the industry. And I'm sure a lot of us on the webinar today have been following your podcast, Roel. So, Roel, thank you so much for joining us. How are you doing today?
Yeah, thanks for having me. Pretty excited to be here and happy to talk fundamentals because I always harp on the fundamentals. It goes a long way.
Yes, the foundation's how we build everything, right? So, yeah, we've got Roel joining us. He's going to be our guest speaker today, a great friend of the show. Myself and Troy, it's really cool that we get to do this together in person. You just saw Stu; he's over in there now on his laptop, going to be furiously answering questions in the Q&A. And yeah, looking forward. Dale was supposed to be here, but maybe he's got caught up on something else. But never mind. And you might be thinking, well, how far out in advance do you need to book Roel to join for a webinar? Actually, turns out it was November 2024 that we actually asked Roel to come and join us for a webinar, and September of 2025 was his next availability. So if you want to get Roel onto some sort of webinar or podcast or anything like that, you better get on his calendar nice and early.
And we had to talk to his handler. It wasn't even a direct conversation with Roel. He has agents that he uses. We had to reach out to them, have our people talk to his people. It was quite the ordeal.
Yeah, it was like there was a gatekeeper saying, "Who are these guys?" Ekahau.
So it's been a long time in the making. We've been looking forward to this one, Roel. So yeah, really excited. But before we jump into Roel's content and stop sharing, so Roel can go through his slides. Troy, maybe you can tell everyone about a really cool event coming up soon.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you haven't already, put a spot on your calendar for October 2nd. We're planning Wi-Fi Day 2025. The registration link is on the slide that you see below. You can scan the QR code if you'd like. But check out that link. We do have a list of speakers who will be presenting that day. So Matt and myself will be presenting. We have Stephen Bai from Ookla. Alan and Luke will be presenting as well as some special guests, right? So we have Bruno Thomas from the WBA, Dobius from HPE, Matt Schwartz from Cisco.
Alexis is going to be joining us as well. Alexis
Fantastic.
Yep.
Yeah. So lots of really cool speakers that we have on the agenda. So check it out as a registration. Again, it's happening October 2nd. Scan the QR code or hit up the web link. There is no cost to register, and it is a virtual event, right? So we do expect to see you guys there.
Perfect. All right. Well, Roel, over to you, my friend. Let me stop the share.
Sure thing. Let's see if the Wi-Fi guy knows how to use Zoom. I think I did
we
it.
see. Yeah, we see. Okay.
All right. Well, thanks for having me. Really glad to talk about fundamentals and some real world strategies. I've done quite a few, one or two successful deployments, maybe a little bit more than that. But I do really like talking about fundamentals because it's always missed. And I think people get hung up in some of the very technical details before you tackle the fundamentals, or some of the folks who are getting into Wi-Fi might just see too much of the deep technical items. But when it comes to doing design and configuring Wi-Fi networks, start with the fundamentals. It's a good way to begin.
Yeah, and speaking about beginning, did you want us to launch a quick poll question?
Yeah, let's do it. Kind of help shape the conversation here.
All right. So hopefully everyone can see the poll question up on the screen now. So the question is, what is the biggest Wi-Fi challenge you're facing today? Is it budget? Is it help desk tickets? Is it selecting a solution, AI madness? Or if it's something else, let us know in the chat.
I always like to think of the OSI model with the 7 layers, but a lot of people don't realize there's 3 hidden layers up top. So layer 8 is the management or the political layer, but layer 9 is what I often refer to as the financial or the budget layer. Right? If you run out of money for a project, it grinds to a halt pretty quick. Budget's not approved, things don't happen. Right? So I'm curious where everyone's going to land in this poll, if budget will come out on top or if there's just too much AI madness.
Okay, well, it seems like we've got quite a few votes that have been submitted. So why don't I go ahead and end the poll and share the results? So, well, what do you think?
Budget.
Yeah. Does that shock you, or was you expecting?
A little bit. I would
Okay.
have thought it would have been tickets, although
Mm.
that's a pretty big portion as well. But I think it's a good way to shape this discussion and use the Q&A. Like these fine gents will stop me if something comes up because I really want this to be more conversational and valuable to you guys. And so my slides are kind of placeholders, and I'll talk through them. But if you have a very specific question, put it in there. I won't necessarily be looking at the chat, but these guys will.
Yeah, we will be keeping a sharp eye on it. So let me stop sharing and over to you, Roel.
All right. So initially, when you come up with or you have a project that you've been engaged in doing, it usually starts with design, right? And so when we talk about design, or when I do design, coverage is always 100%. That's a thing. Like we have to do 100% coverage. There used to be a time where the restrooms weren't covered, but now they are due to things like safety reasons. I don't know if you've ever been in a situation where someone has fallen in the restroom, right? They could slip and fall. Maybe they're the only ones there, and they can't communicate out to somebody. And so 100% coverage is required there. Stairwells are something newer in my area where people want coverage in the stairwells. Surprisingly, I do see people go out into the stairwell to even make calls. I don't know if that's the best place to do those calls, but it's an option. And so when we talk about coverage, it's always going to be there. If anything, I ask people, what do you not need covered? And we'll just skip that. And usually that's some sort of closet that it's just storage. No one needs to be in there, those kinds of things, or areas where that's not particularly covered by that tenant. And so I always lean on capacity first, capacity and the requirement areas. And you really want to build your Wi-Fi to fit the application needs and the number of devices that are going to be joining your network. And I will always go on to the design to the higher end of that use case because you just never know, right? They might have hundreds of desks on a floor, but they'll say, at any given time, there's probably going to be 20 to 30% of the people here. We're hybrid up until they have an all hands meeting. Everyone shows up. And for whatever reason, everyone loves to join an all hands meeting on a Zoom while they're there in person. I don't know why. It's just a thing. They all bring their laptops, they all bring their phones, they all connect to the same access point that you ended up putting there in, say, the kitchen. Maybe the kitchen's where the all hands is. And you thought, there's going to be 10 to 20 people at most here, and one AP will cover it all up until they try to fit 100 people in that room. And now the CEO is trying to present, but he's presenting via Canva, like how I'm doing, and the slides are just crawling. They can't change, or it's just not working at all. And so design to capacity first. And within Ekahau, you can define requirement areas. And that's how I look at it, is different requirement areas within a floor plan. Not necessarily one floor plan being one single requirement area, but you can nest them and define a specific area. Maybe a boardroom has a different capacity than the general office space. And then with today's Wi-Fi systems, there's RRM, which will handle channel planning and transmit power control. There's going to be a lot of times where you just want to be able to fine tune that. And so you want to design to the lowest capable device. That's what I do. People are typically bringing in what's the least capable device I've seen lately? I've seen those little computer sticks that are on via USB. They plug them into the back of a TV monitor. And so I have to take that into consideration of design because there's no Ethernet port on that thing, and they'll just connect to Wi-Fi. And it's a computer that basically shows dashboards, and we'll have people complain how the dashboards are lagging because there's just no connectivity there. And so that's why I say, capacity first, design to the lowest capable device, and tune RRM. You can use RRM. I think it's such a great feature for us to use, especially when you've got multiple environments that we're managing. But you do have to tune RRM. I think when I talk about fundamentals and I talk to other people in troubleshooting their networks, most of the time it's tuning RRM. And so those default values, you just got to modify. And I think when you deploy like Cisco, Cisco is notorious for this. Like people will say bad things about Cisco RRM, but it has to be tuned. Those are just the default settings. You got to tune it to your environment. So it's not their fault. If anything, it's my fault for not configuring it. And so learn how the product learn how their RRM works, and then tune it. So those are the first two things I like to talk about.
Yeah, it's almost like putting a little bit like guardrails on your network. If you don't set the kind of like parameters and guardrails, then everything can go run quite wild. But
Yeah.
Roel, since you were talking about stairwells earlier, we have our first question in the Q&A, and the question is like, what constraints do you need to work through when designing for Wi-Fi coverage in stairwells? You know, i.e., the environment or fire marshals, or is there anything else that you need to take into consideration?
Yeah, the fire marshals can be a challenge because they'll deny that installation if you have to go through a firewall, not your network firewall, but physical firewall within the walls. And it has to be done properly by the installer. And so it can be done because you see things like electrical get put in there. You see smoke detectors get put in there. So you could put APs in stairwells. So it really you work with either the architect, the construction crew, and then working with your city code on what can be done in the stairwells. When it comes to requirements in the stairwells, I'm just trying to provide enough coverage and roaming. So that way, if somebody was going up or down the stairs, they would be able to hand off to another AP. There's a lot of signal bleed between floors. So I'm not putting an AP on every single floor of the stairwell because that coverage does propagate pretty far.
Yeah.
Circling back to the poll question with budget floating up to the top and thinking about layer 9, do you ever have conversation with customers when you're asking them about what areas are in scope and which ones aren't? Do you ever dial it back to a budgetary conversation to kind of showcase why you're asking? For example, and you said, hey, if washrooms are in scope and I need to put an access point in the washroom to provide coverage to meter design targets, that's going to cost more money. Or in the case of stairwells, running extra conduit, are you willing to pay for an AP to go in those locations and kind of dial it back to kind of a financial implication of making those decisions?
Yeah, those are very early questions that need to be asked and to be considered. So if we're brought in late in the game, right? If we're talking new construction, we're brought in very late, like obviously they probably have a set budget already. And we would have to work around that budget and remove things that aren't absolutely required, but caveat that with them saying, okay, if I remove an access point here, you have to rely on maybe cell coverage if that's coming through the building, right? And so there's going to be a lot of trade-offs, but our job or my job is to provide options and tell them pros and cons, or here's what you need to think about if you're going to make changes to this design. If you're going to move an access point that's not in this room, but now out here, you could have a coverage gap because of the building material. So I think a lot of discussion that has to go on up front. Usually if you have a checklist or discussion items, that's just a document you could just keep and then copy that within duplicate it within every project. So you always ask the same questions. And then as new things come up, it could be just covered in that, more like a discovery question. It's just trying to figure out what exactly are their needs. Budget, I try to determine early on and then set expectations of, all right, here's how much access points cost. If here's the high, medium, low, here's the pros and cons down below, and then they can try to decide from there. And also it's just based on, usually if it's a larger organization and they've standardized on APs, they already know what the cost is, and it'll just come down to construction costs, running cabling or conduit, how many runs per AP, that kind of thing. And so if anything, if they're running 2 Ethernet cables per AP, I'll say we can maybe save on costs if we just run 1 cable. So you just got to find other ways to try to make it more affordable or meet the budget. Yeah, and
Always
I think
a challenging goal to come in on that budget. Another question that just came up in the chat there, and often it's many scenarios the same question would apply. And it's one of the challenging environments, I think, to deploy Wi-Fi in. But do you have guidance on how you'd approach providing Wi-Fi in an elevator?
Mhm.
Hmm.
It's funny because I will test Wi-Fi whenever I go into elevators just to see if it works, and usually it doesn't work very well.
You're on a speed test in
And
the elevator?
yeah, speed test, or the simple test for me is like, let me load up my email, and if nothing's loading, then there's no signal, even cell signal. And the ways that I would approach that is, one, I think you've got to work with the elevator manufacturer. Sometimes they have a solution, they've thought about that, especially if it's one of those big name elevator manufacturers. And then two, you've got to put an AP or an AP and an antenna. You can, I don't know how you want to mount it. There's different ways to do it, but you need a cable that can coil all the way down. So if you're talking like a 50-story building, you're probably not going to be able to do that with a long coil cable. You'd probably have to put a switch on the elevator and then plug the AP there and maybe run fiber that coils down all the way to the switch. But I think it's definitely doable. I think I've done it once and it worked out. It worked out pretty well. But it was a very short. It wasn't a very tall building. It was maybe 3 stories.
You ran the coil down the.
Yeah, I left it up to the construction guys. I just said, hey, we're required to put Wi-Fi in the elevator for emergency purposes if they need to make a call out, and we just need the cable to go down here. How would you do this? And they figured out a way to make it coil as the elevator goes up and down, and to make sure that it doesn't like tangle within the elevator.
It
That's
was
like
just
outside of my area of expertise. I leave it to the guys who can, they're running cables down there anyways with the making the elevator go up and down. So
yeah. Was it a new building or an existing elevator? Was it
I
during
think this
construction
one
or
was an existing. This was an
existing?
existing.
Okay. And do you know, did they have to get any special bylaw approvals or inspection done as a result of this, or just along with the other cables that were being run?
I want to say they did. I don't. This was a long time ago, and I think they did have to get that one approved.
Okay.
All right. So some of the real world best practices that I use, right? A lot of times I'll see people broadcasting so many SSIDs. This is an easy one. This is like low hanging fruit in my opinion, because when I look at the number of SSIDs being broadcasted, and then I check the configuration of each of those SSIDs, so many of them are on the same VLAN. And you're basically just dropping everyone on the same network, but they're all getting in through a different door. They're all going to the same building. And so why not just collapse those SSIDs and minimize the airtime usage by all those SSIDs being broadcasted? And also from a end user perspective, end user experience, coming from a campus with a number of SSIDs, these folks will connect to any SSID they can get their hands on. If it's not working on one SSID, they're going to hop on another SSID. They don't know that those SSIDs are being broadcasted by the same access point. And so, if someone's on visitor and it's not working, they'll go try to join another one. And guess what? Now they've got every single SSID remembered on their phone or their laptop. And as they walk around or roam, they're just jumping between SSIDs because that's what their device is deciding to do. And now their user experience kind of degrades because of them being on a different network all of a sudden, or that handoff going from one SSID to another SSID. They'll see a drop somewhere. If they're on a Zoom call, they'll see that drop entirely, and they'll start putting in tickets. So limit the number of SSIDs that you're broadcasting if you can, or limit them to specific areas. I know some organizations will want, maybe there's an event on campus and you need a customized SSID. That's fine. Just don't broadcast it throughout the whole campus. Just keep it in that contained environment. And then start looking at role-based access control. I know that in the past, as engineers, we were all logging into our controllers and it was just us. But today I'm seeing all sorts of people log into the dashboard. It could be folks who are working with location-based services, so they have to work with maps and build their solution out. It could be somebody with marketing. Maybe they need to look at some analytics. It could be someone who is just in charge of a building, so they don't need access to the whole organization of access points, but maybe just specific set of access points for a building. So you want to work with role-based access control, and then start thinking about WPA3. So many of us are still on WPA2. I know it's difficult to make that transition, but I think it's time to start planning if you're not, because we've been on WPA2 longer than I've been in Wi-Fi or in networking. It was born before me. Actually, maybe not. But it's been used for a long time. And we got to start increasing our security posture by going towards 802.1x or enabling WPA3. And on top of that, with zero trust networking, Wi-Fi is probably going to be the last one to be looked at when we talk about zero trust, because people just think, you connect to Wi-Fi, they always just forget about security with Wi-Fi. But you want to look at some sort of NAC or something that will tie into identity-based security, where it's not just a device on a Wi-Fi network being able to access a server, but now you're looking at NAC, device posturing, identity. Who is that person? Is this this device have everything it needs to be secure in order to access this resource? So start thinking about that. I know NAC was such a cumbersome thing like many years back, but it's gotten a lot easier. So these are the other components I start looking at for best practices.
And I think those are really great points, right? All things that you'd want to consider. Just jumping back to the first one, SSIDs. If you needed to communicate to someone that was non-technical, how having too many SSIDs would impact their network. For example, if they're very keen on lighting up what I'll call it a vanity SSID, and they wanted to have a different SSID for every name to show off, in a convention center where they had different companies coming in to rent space, or at a hotel for the rooms, and they wanted to show off their company's name and increase the number of SSIDs. In non-technical terms, do you have any analogies or any stories, or how would you convince them that they'd be detrimental to their Wi-Fi?
Yeah, a lot of times I'll say that the user, like, aim at talking about user experience, like what's in it for them that they wouldn't want to go and do it this other way. Because if I talk about how it's easier for me, if it's, it's a lot easier if I do this, like, they don't care. They just want to know what works for them. And so if I start talking about, hey, you'll have a better end user experience and all your guests will have a better end user experience if we don't have X number of SSIDs being broadcasted, they won't find the right one. They'll join to the incorrect one. I think if you approach it that way, it's a lot more easier for them to accept that. But sometimes the end user will dictate it. I've had many battles with that. Some I've won, some I've lost. And so when I lose them, and I do have to provide a new SSID, I will have a time constraint on it. So I'll say, okay, when's the start and end of this event? Because then we'll turn it off afterwards. Or if it's a recurring event, we'll have somebody, it's like, hey, submit a ticket, we'll turn it on a day before your event and then turn it off after your event. So there's going to be negotiations, and you got to handle it as it is. People got to do their work, so it's just part of the nature of doing business.
Yeah, so with 6 gigahertz now we have MBSSID, right? So you can have multiple SSIDs, but only it's like one beacon going out, and for let's say you have 10 on 6 gigahertz. So I guess it's not quite as impactful on 6 gigahertz as it was before on, like, let's say 2.4 or 5 gigahertz. And with 6 gigahertz being the cleaner spectrum and you start at a higher minimum basic rate, it doesn't probably not as impactful as what it was, like how detrimental that was before on 2.4 and 5 gigahertz.
I think once people are on 6 gigahertz, I think then we'll see the benefit. But I mean, if I did another poll and said how many of you are on 6 gigahertz, it's probably going to be very small.
Yeah, we don't have that one loaded in, but people can let us know in the chat if they've migrated their network over to 6 gigahertz here, if they're still running on 2.4 or 5.
Yeah, because if you haven't migrated to WPA3, I know you're not on 6 gigahertz. Right. So then there's troubleshooting, right? I think troubleshooting is the hardest part. I think setting something up is easy enough, right? Wi-Fi is very forgiving, so you can set it up in the most impossible way, and somehow it still works. But when there's issues, I think this is where a lot of people start to stumble, especially when you're talking about different teams, right? For us as Wi-Fi engineers, we've got this down. We know what we need to do. But when you have a triage, how do you prevent a triage team from just saying, "Oh, it's a Wi-Fi issue. Let me just escalate it up to tier 3"? Like, how do you enable that team to be able to troubleshoot? And so I think for a lot of us, we just have to have a process laid out for for the lower teams that work with us to be able to troubleshoot and triage, because a lot of times it's just an individual device issue and not necessarily a Wi-Fi issue affecting everybody. And so the first thing is always looking at RSSI. I always start closest to the end user that's having the issue. And so do they have good signal? What's their SNR looking like? Look at the most common culprits. Maybe you can move number 3 up to number 1. Is it a DHCP and DNS issue? Uh, and then after that, if you've eliminated 1, 2, and 3, then I start looking at the rest of the network, because it really comes to identifying what the problem is, because everyone will say Wi-Fi is the problem, even if it's them accessing an application. Sometimes I didn't even put application on here because once you've identified all of these as not being the problem, then it's likely an application issue somewhere on the internet, right? And we can leverage AI tools to find those root causes a lot faster. I think that's great, because having to sift through a bunch of logs, um, I think is something of the past. I think AI should help us look through those logs and say, hey, here's all these errors I'm seeing bubbling up. Maybe you should start looking here. I still use other monitoring tools like Zabbix to have sensors on a network that will tell me where certain issues are, and we can help triage Wi-Fi issues and say, hey, you know what, this is more of a network issue because this switch up here is down, and we see that. Or you could use your sidekick and do, if you're on site, do use analyzer. You know, if someone's saying, you know, my speed is really slow, I can't do email, you can use analyzer right there, look, pull up speed tests and confirm if you're able to replicate that issue. And then if you really need to, because you've exhausted everything, you could do a packet capture over the air and see if it's something else. And there's been times where I've had to pull up the packet capture where I was in a manufacturing facility, and we had changed over access points. They upgraded, and they had these tools that weren't connecting to Wi-Fi, but a small subset were. So I thought that was kind of interesting, until someone told me, like, these are newer tools and the ones that aren't connecting are older tools. And so I pulled up a packet capture and was able to see that these tools weren't joining because of the preamble, but it said that in the packet capture, but it didn't say it in the dashboard. And so that's one way I was able to leverage packet captures.
Wasn't
I
happy
have a
with the
process laid
preamble.
out.
That's pretty wild. Not happy with the preamble.
Yeah, these were old tools.
Yeah, yeah. That'd be a tough one to pin down.
I was lucky that the packet, you'll see it in one of my other screenshots if it's not too small. And then of course, design, I feel is always 100%. Because the design is kind of like your blueprint, right? No one ever goes, hey, I need a house, but just build it. Here's wood, just start hammering away, build it out. You're gonna have an architect design something for you, and then ask you questions like, do you want, the kitchen sink here, or do you prefer it over here by the window? Or do you want your bathroom over here, by the stairs, or do you prefer it to be out in the hallway? And it's the same thing with Wi-Fi, is you want to create a design using Ekahau to build out, with the access points that you're going to use, what that signal will predictively look like. Because again, coverage is 100%. We're designing for capacity for the less capable device, but also take into consideration roaming, how people walk into a space. If you're in a warehouse, how do people walk into an aisle? Do they have, like, go on site? I bet you some of these locations are so efficient that they have arrows that say people have to walk in from this side of the warehouse aisle. Or you've got robots and they connect over Wi-Fi. Someone can tell you, here's the path that each of these robots take. Maybe they don't go in random paths. So you want to consider that. So create a design and look at roaming. And then this is how you can build this confidence with the end user that you're actually planning something and not just, guessing where the access points go. And that's probably what a lot of end users think. It's like, oh, you just say AP here, AP there. No, I'm actually building out a design. Here's what it looks like. And then you can go to the end user and the installer or the architect and say, is this where we can place access points? And you'll probably find some constraints there as well. Like, no, you can't place an access point there because that's not a wall. It's a glass. So you can't mount it on the wall, or there's no ceiling there. That just goes straight up to the roof, which is all windows. But you guys get what I'm saying, right?
Yeah, and there was a question in the chat earlier about what constraints that you would typically work through when you're designing for a coverage in a warehouse. When sometimes in the rack and aisles you might have like plastic bottles, and you might have some like metallic kegs, and sometimes they're fully stacked.
Eggs, huh?
Yeah,
Might not
like
be in the warehouses you're in. Yeah,
you can come over anytime, Roel.
Aging whiskey.
So yeah.
Those environments are so challenging that I always recommend an on-site visit, because a predictive can only go so far, right? You have to know the environment. I've done carpeted office space so much that I can predict what it's going to look like. I can understand what the wall materials are going to look like. Show me the renderings, and I'll ask questions around, hey, what is this? What is this ceiling? Can I mount an AP here? But when it comes to warehouses, the reason why I recommend the on-site is because you don't know what they're putting in the shelves. And sometimes you need to go and gather some measurements to determine what that attenuation is between each aisle, and even at what elevation. Because you could be in a manufacturing plant where they create cars, so the majority of those materials are going to be metal. And you want to understand, is there any attenuation, or is that signal just bouncing around within the aisle? And then the other constraint would be cabling. You're going to run into distance issues. Where is this IDF going to be placed? Because if I say I'm going to need an access point here, 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 and then it's at the very corner of that warehouse, 300 feet for a warehouse isn't actually that far, right? Because if you're saying the AP has to be brought down about 20, 30 feet, that's 20, 30 feet going up and then across. And then some people place IDFs near the ceiling and some place them down below. So you got to accommodate that distance. And then there's other logistics, like how do we get to that IDF? How are we going to service the switches and whatnot? And so some people don't think about that. And some people don't have lifts. Like, do you have a lift on site if there's an emergency? Like, there's so many logistics to think about that I bring up, and I'll say, hey, okay, if we're helping you support this, what is how quickly should we resolve this issue? Because if there's a switch problem and it's going to take me a day to get a lift, and then we have to get someone lift certified to get up there, that's going to take some time. And so there's a lot of questions that I ask about that as well. And then they decide, oh, you know what? Maybe we shouldn't put the IDFs down up there. We'll put them down below. That way you can just walk up to it, maybe use a ladder to get there. All right. Now, with the reason why in the poll I asked about AI madness is because some people don't believe like AI is actually helping, or AI will be a thing for us. But I think AI is just beginning for Wi-Fi. There's a lot of different tools that we could leverage to try to determine where we should look at first. It might not provide you the exact answer, but you can use it to lower things like your mean time to innocence or your mean time to resolution. I don't ever like mentioning mean time to innocence in front of end users, because if I'm speaking to an end user and I'm trying to lower my mean time to innocence, I feel like they might think, oh, you're just trying to get out of the situation and point the finger to somebody else. And so I always talk about mean time to resolution. MTTI is really an internal conversation, right? Like, how quickly do you want to say it's not Wi-Fi, but then not just point the finger, but help help fix the issue. We just say, hey, Wi-Fi is not the problem, it's something else. And so you could use Optimizer, right? To, if someone's done a survey for you, I have people who help me do surveys. They can do the survey, upload the results. We can use Optimizer and quickly determine where we should look at first, rather than opening up the project file, looking at every single access point, looking at every single square inch of this floor plan. Let me tackle the things and prioritize them and say, okay, here's red, yellow, green. Here's where we're good. The yellow, maybe they're low-hanging fruit. We can tackle some of those pretty quickly, but these red items, these will require more discussion. Maybe it's a full-on project to address it. And then as you dig into some of these, maybe it's improved primary coverage. We can look at the file and maybe do a redesign, right? And so that's how I would approach certain things. That's how I'd use AI. It's just more of a tool that we have available to us to have a solution much faster for the end user, rather than waiting weeks and weeks and then, telling them, Wi-Fi is good, or you know what, you need to buy 30 new access points. But a lot of times I'll go into the project with them rather than just creating a report. I'll create a report, give it to them, but then I'll go through it with them, so that way they're not developing something in their own head as they go through it. I may explain things a little bit better and hear it from their side.
Yeah, I completely agree with you with the mean time to innocence. The faster you can identify segments on that end-to-end path that are not causing the issue, the faster you can start focusing on the points of that flow that are contributing the issue, right? So if you can eliminate Wi-Fi as the problem, then perhaps you can re-engage with the application team or the virtualization team to focus on an issue that part of their infrastructure that they're managing or the software they're looking at is causing the issue for the client, instead of them pushing it back onto Wi-Fi. So it is
exactly.
a key metric to look at, and it helps refocus and reprioritize the root cause of many issues.
Yeah, and from a collaborative point of view, what works really well is once you've identified that it's not a Wi-Fi issue, document that and send it along, but say, hey, here's what I see. It's not a Wi-Fi issue, but I see this, and we should look this way. Rather than just saying, hey, it's not a Wi-Fi issue, I'm going to go to lunch. Bye.
Yeah.
Bye.
All right. And so with those types of issues, there's going to be challenges on the network all the time. For whatever reason, like DHCP and DNS always are the culprit, but it's Wi-Fi that takes the brunt of it, right? So AI can help us determine where most of those issues lie. And that's why I like using the Mist dashboard, because it does help show us where most of those issues are. Because you won't necessarily see this type of issue on a validation survey, unless you're connecting to the actual network. But there's scenarios where I'm a contractor on site, I'm doing a validation survey, but I can't join to their SSID because it's 802.1x. I have to load certs on my device, then I have to join their MDM. So usually I'm doing a passive survey, but these dashboards can help us determine where other issues lie that may look like a Wi-Fi issue. And then some other issues that I see come up is an end user saying, you know what, I have pretty low bandwidth over here. The speed's not good. And a lot of times nowadays that's relative. And I blame marketing for this, but on Wi-Fi, like you can see my speed test there with Ekahau Analyzer on my iPad, 520 megabits per second is not bad. And you can see the
Pretty
spectrum.
good, I'd say.
Yeah, it's pretty good. That's pretty good for anything, right? For the Zoom call, for watching YouTube, for all the things that people do at work, all the non-work things. And that's generally good.
What was you running? What was you running on your? Was it? You say it was an iPad on an 80 megahertz wide channel on 5 gigahertz?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean that's pretty. That's kind of pretty much as like expected.
You can't complain, right?
Yeah.
But
Sounds
you know what?
like
The
you should
end
be
users will
deploying 80
complain.
megahertz.
The end users will complain. I just saw a ticket the other day where someone said they submitted a ticket saying the Wi-Fi bandwidth is slow, and they actually provided their speed test results, and it was like 300 megabits per second. And I was like, "What is this slow for? Were you downloading 10 ISOs at the same time? I don't know. ISO files. Like, tell me more about how this is slow for you." And usually it's more of an expectation that the user has, right? Maybe they've been seeing a lot of marketing around Wi-Fi 7 and we should be at 46 gigabits per second. I don't know. But usually it's more of an expectation, but I always drill it down to, is this, where are you seeing the issue at? Which application are you having a problem with? And generally they will say, I don't have a problem with an application. And I'll just say, okay, so is it just the number on the speed test that you're concerned about? And they'll say, yeah, pretty much. I'm like, okay, just let me know when, you can't do Zoom, you can't do Teams, whatever, and then we'll go from there. But a lot of times speed test servers are also not equal. They're all very different. They're all hosted somewhere else under different control. A long time ago, I used to host a speed test server for somebody, and I was trying to fight for more bandwidth because one, the server only had a 1 gig connection, Ethernet connection. And then two, their ISP connection was 500 megs. And I said, if I have two people just hitting the speed test server, the results are bad. Like they're going to see it's very slow. And so that could be deceiving for a lot of people as well. And so having maybe an on-site speed test server, you can host a open source one to not have them go out to the internet, but check your local network. And then, external network's a different thing, but also out of your control most of the time. And then again, that third screenshot there I have on the bottom right is the tool that couldn't connect to the Wi-Fi network. And so essentially what I'm saying here is understand each of the tools that are available to you, understand how they work, understand how the user would interpret it so you can explain to them what the problem is. And then also, if you understand these tools a lot better, that makes you a better Wi-Fi professional. You'll be able to troubleshoot pretty quickly, build out documentation that you can teach to the rest of your team or to other members of a different team. So that way they understand what you're looking for rather than people trying to find a problem to fix. Because with these dashboards, you may have, like, let's just take the Mist dashboard as an example. I can give somebody access to the Mist dashboard for a site, but let's say coverage started to dip, but maybe because APs were at the edge of the building and there's like a long pathway outside of that building for a lot of students to walk by, and they just happen to connect to that AP when they pass by, and then they disappear, but they stick to it. I don't want that end user to think, hey, there's a coverage issue here. Let me see if I can fix that. And then start creating tickets about how coverage isn't working. And so like help these other people understand how to use a tool and how to interpret the results as well.
Yeah, and I think you're stating the obvious, but it's worth emphasizing that there are multiple tools to get the job done, right? So it's important to pick the tool that's appropriate for that situation. And it's not just one tool to solve everything, that you need a couple different tools in your tool belt.
Yeah, because the dashboards could tell you one thing, right? Like I say here, challenge finds a path on a network because the end user will say it's not working, but your dashboards say everything's working. So where do you go from there? Do you tell the end user, no, everything's good? And then they escalate the ticket? We don't want that.
Since we've been speaking about speed tests so much, and I knew you was going to bring up the image of your colleague performing a survey. If anyone has updated their survey app in the last, I don't know,
Couple hours now.
couple of hours, you might find there's a new feature available inside of the survey app where you can actually run a speed test inside of the survey app now and correlate your location for where you run a speed test. So like you've got a speed test and analyzer showing you that live data, we thought it'd be really cool and beneficial and useful if you're doing a site survey and you've walked around the office or you've walked around whatever the warehouse and you want to run a speed test in some specific locations. You can now do that and tie it to a specific point on the map as well. So you can go back and look, oh, I was down the middle of this racking aisle and I was getting, 30 megs, and then I'll go to the office and I can get 70 megs, and then you can kind of compare that data and then correlate the position, which is very beneficial and helpful.
Yeah, so it essentially appears like a map note. A little speed test logo appears, so you can quickly identify where you ran the speed test from, and it saves the results as a comment inside your note, which then you can extract and add to reports or documentation.
All right.
Did any of you guys pick up the it was either some sort of like police or fire brigade like it was driving past? Did you hear it on the mics?
No.
Oh, wow. Okay, that was pretty loud.
Noise canceling for the win then.
All right. So for us, like as we manage Wi-Fi, because we actually manage networks for a couple of different clients, it all starts with this life cycle management, right? It starts not with day zero or day one, but like day -1, because we have a conversation with people. What are their current challenges? There's going to be a lot of users who don't talk about their issues anymore because they just think that's the norm or that's just how it works. So we go and talk with users, find out what their problems are, what applications they have issues with, where in the office or where in the facility they have a problem, and then we will prioritize each of those problems, try to map them to maybe different projects, and then we'll give them some initial wins right off the bat. Like anything that's easy to change. It could be maybe RRM, adjusting RRM, and then that way the APs operate better. We want to give them a good new user experience at day one. And then beyond that is really just operating under that new experience and continuing to have that good experience by optimizing wherever possible. It could be moving an access point to a different location or adding a new access point somewhere where they didn't have one. Maybe putting an access point in a VIP room. So every time I do a new design, I ask, are there any executives on this floor? Or they tell me this is the C-suite. And I go, okay, where's the CEO's office? And usually it's the office with its own meeting room attached to it. But I'll put an access point there because that person's probably always mobile, probably has 7 devices, right? Like, have you seen these CEOs? They have every kind of device possible and they use them all for whatever reason. I don't know how they do that, but they also bring in guests, right? So you want to have a good Wi-Fi experience for at least your top executives, just because you don't want them coming downstairs to the dungeon saying, hey, Wi-Fi doesn't work, or their assistant coming to you. So we want to be able to create a good user experience before day one. Just start asking questions. If you're engaged with these end users, to them, that's already a good experience because you're listening to them. A lot of times they've been forgotten and they just think IT doesn't like them, and their IT's there to make their lives miserable. And so you want to add value to these end users. How do we do that? Do you guys know what ELI5 is? It means explain it like I'm 5. You're muted, guys, just in case you're talking. But yeah, you want to explain it like I'm 5. Like what does this screenshot mean? If I said, hey, here's what it looks like in your warehouse, they're gonna look at me. The warehouse manager is gonna look at me and go, okay, well, my scanners are still dropping in the middle of the aisle. What does this mean? It's green. Is green good? And a lot of times when users look at these reports and they see green is good, I like to dive into some of the little things and show like maybe this one access point tilt isn't correct. Maybe it's a little too high or a little too low. And so that aisle specifically might have a different signal strength. But break down these Wi-Fi concepts for these end users. Don't speak very, very technical terms to them because they don't know and they don't care. They just want to know, is it going to work for me when I go back? And so you want to have empathy. You want to have compassion. I know it's hard for some of us, but I'll tell you, like, that really goes a long way. And it makes you invaluable because then now you're a trustworthy resource to these people, and they go to you for solutions rather than avoiding you and going to somebody else. And so start this from the beginning all the way through the end, even through support, and it'll go a long way. Trust me. I've been in situations where I had to be part of a transition to us from another team, and you can kind of see the disappointment in the other team because what has happened is that they were looked at as someone who no one wants to talk to them, or they belittle the end user because they think they should know how to do certain things, like they should know that they should turn off their Wi-Fi and turn it on again, which you shouldn't have to do, honestly. If you have to do that, there's a bigger problem. So add value as much as you can. That's the non-technical piece that I have here.
That's a great point. There's definitely soft skills involved to being part of the Wi-Fi world. And I was just having this conversation at lunch that one of the things that's different from a lot of traditional IT roles, that you may be sitting at your desk or working in a basement, but you can log into all your equipment remotely. You never need to leave your desk or interact with other people. But in Wi-Fi, you're out on the floor, you're interacting with other departments, other users, speaking to the people using the Wi-Fi network, and you have to be able to communicate in a way that they understand, right? Instead of speaking, Wi-Fi mumbo jumbo to them.
Exactly. So this is a duplicate slide. I forgot to remove
it. Just really wanted to hit home those points.
So I wanted to touch again on AI because that's the future of Wi-Fi. Every other piece of the network has some sort of AI component to it, and I think Wi-Fi is just starting to have AI, but treat it as another essential tool that, as an engineer, you have in your toolkit, and you could have it amplify your expertise. There's a lot of times where I'm now starting to use even ChatGPT, and I'll, instead of asking ChatGPT questions, build your own GPT and then feed it information. So I've given it CWNA information, Wireshark information, analysis information. So then if I give it a very specific question and like, or maybe some specific logs, it understands already what I'm looking for and it'll be able to answer it a little bit better. But, a caution with AI is that it could give you the wrong information. I had the other day, and there was an issue and the end user said, hey, I used ChatGPT to try to figure out what the problem is. And this is what it told me. And so I was like, all right, I just kind of like browsed through it. I said, okay, thanks for that information. I'll take a look. And when I solved the problem, I said, it was none of those issues. This is the solution right here. And so it really depends on the questions you're asking. So instead of just treating AI as this potential tool that can solve all your problems, use it to find issues a little bit faster or find details that you maybe couldn't see. You can feed it logs, and then it's really the prompt that you have to work at. So for us, it's becoming a Wi-Fi engineer, Wi-Fi prompt engineer, because the answer will be as good as the prompt. It's basically a garbage in, garbage out type of analogy. So if you just say, hey, my Wi-Fi signal sucks, what do I do? I'm pretty sure ChatGPT will say, for one, it'll call it a router, and then it'll say, move your router to a central place, turn your router on and off again. What else? Add a booster, something like that, right? And so we have to caution the use of AI, but as these vendors implement AI into their technology, it's unavoidable. So we just have to be able to adjust and maybe be on top of it and really understand how AI can be used to help us with our jobs. So as the comment there is another layer to add to your list, Troy, on your OSI model.
Exactly.
The Troy model.
But I used to refer to layer 10 as the aesthetics committee. And so maybe I'll put AI as layer 11, A1.
There you go. So that's really the extent of the fundamentals I wanted to dive into. Otherwise, we're going to dive into much more technical topics. I can talk about logistics. I could talk about aesthetics. I do a lot more than technical discussions just because these buildings nowadays, they're very fancy. And so it's hard to, one, the buildings are getting very fancy, and two, the APs are getting bigger. And so it becomes a challenge with the architects call these ugly, and you want to put something ugly in their nicely designed office space. But if you guys have any other questions, you can find me online. The QR code goes to my blog, which then feeds to everything else as well. I have a podcast with Francois, and we talk about Wi-Fi over at Clear Descend.
Yeah, check that out. It's one of the podcasts that I recommend for anybody just getting into Wi-Fi or at the end of the ECSC courses. When students maybe go into a state of depression because Wi-Fi is done for that week, I encourage them to go check out the Clear Descend podcast episodes to continue their Wi-Fi learning journey.
Yeah, I don't know if we have time for questions or comments.
Yeah.
Am I absolutely wrong? Am I a joke?
No, we can stay on for a few minutes longer if you've got the time, Roel. There was a question that came into the chat asking around Kind of like what transmit power do you typically recommend or use for your deployments, especially when you think about like client devices and what they can do, and you obviously have significant more control and option when it comes to configuring the transmit power of your radios, of your access points. Any thoughts there?
Yeah, because I design to capacity, that usually means more access points are being deployed than previously. And so I lower my transmit power. I start off at 10. Sometimes I can go lower depending on it. So if I'm dealing with carpeted office space and there's no cubicles, it's just desks and large open space, that signal propagates very far. And so sometimes I'll drop to like 8 dBm and go from there. And then I'll make adjustments and call outs to APs where I have to increase the transmit power a little bit higher. But I don't go above 15 dBm.
And
And
what is the reasoning behind that? Like why
it's
zone
usually
8?
like the device types that I've seen, they don't transmit higher than that. And so I'll try to match the transmit power to some of the end user devices. But I should probably take a look and see if that's changed, especially with the newer laptops and phones.
Yeah, if only there was a way that you could easily profile and see your client device's capabilities. Um, you may be having a new feature come out next week that you can just bring your device close to the psychic and it'll be able to tell you all of that information. But maybe we have to see next week.
Oh, a little bit of a sneak peek or early news.
Mm.
There was topic conversation at the beginning. There was designing for elevators, and that really kind of kicked it off there. And I think one of the things you called out there, Roel, was is I think home in on the local regulations for elevators, because putting elevators in cabs, above cabs, or in the shafts, there's many restrictions.
Yeah.
And I think that's always to the local. I know shafts for sure are not possible
Yeah.
because you can't impede the thing. But I
Yeah.
think it's different. I
You
mean,
don't
I
want
know I've run
people to
into
be
places,
stuck in
right?
the elevator.
What's that? Yeah,
You don't want people to be stuck in the elevator because the elevator hit an AP.
right. Yeah, you don't want to have that. You don't want to be coming down for sure. Yeah. But definitely, for those folks out there, if you got an elevator, always check the local regulations. But be creative. And I do know of a particular place that I hope I can talk about soon, where there is an AP in every elevator, and there's 12 elevators in close proximity, and they work really well going up and down. So
God, that sounds out of this world.
it does, doesn't it?
One of the questions that comes up a lot that I hear from people trying to plan Wi-Fi projects is they want a quick estimate. How many clients can connect to a radio? So do you
A
have any
lot.
guidance, or how do you kind of help people process and understand the question or the thoughts behind the implications of answering that question?
Yeah. Oh, the easy answer is a lot of devices can connect to that AP. So just imagine you have one AP in a room, there's no other APs nearby, and everybody walks in that room. Then every device will connect to it. I've been in situations where we've put it was a lecture hall, and I was very limited on how many APs I can put. And so I saw maybe on some APs 200 clients on there, and it was working fine only because the professor told every student, do not go and do things that aren't related to the class. Like, don't go on YouTube, don't watch last night's game, don't watch Netflix. And it actually worked very well. But that's what I mean by stepping on site and learning how people use their device, because you should accommodate that. Um, we actually ended up going back in there and redesigning it using more narrow antennas to try to move clients to influence clients to go to a specific AP. But we were also, I think that at that point it was 2.4 and 5, and most of the devices are on 5 gigahertz. But we had enabled the other radio, so we had dual 5 gigahertz going on.
Nice. Okay. Well, thank you so much for your time today, Roel. It's always fantastic to have you on the show, and the content, the people in the chat were really enjoying your insights into the fundamentals of managing large-scale Wi-Fi networks. And yeah, just in case people are wondering, this isn't a green screen behind us, and Stu is just here as well.
I'm really in an office, yeah.
So yeah, it was fun for us to get to do this together in person, and thank you so much, Royal, for joining us on the webinar today. Maybe we should book you in now for 2026. So how's September, October, November time looking for next year? We might have to pick a date, but we'll see you in person soon as well.
Yeah, will you guys be at the next conference? Prague, WPC Prague.
Yeah,
I'll see you guys there. Maybe we should do something there.
Definitely. All right. Well,
I say Wi-Fi and golf. What do you think?
Oh, you don't have to convince me too hard with that one, Royal.
That's all.
Okay. Well, thank you everyone for joining. And the next webinar will be Wi-Fi Day officially. So we look forward to seeing you all on Wi-Fi Day. Hopefully you've signed up, and we'll see you there. Stu, Troy, it was a pleasure doing it in person. Roel, thank you very much. See you guys all next time.